Okay, so we're continuing to get lost, and we're on to episode 7, The Moth, which is a Charlie-focused one. Interesting to see what you think of it, because I think it's the weakest episode so
Yeah,
far, going back through it.
interesting. Okay. See, I definitely didn't think it was a particularly weak episode, this one. And I think largely because, by the end of the episode, I much preferred Charlie as a character, which I think is,
Yeah,
clearly one of the things it was intending to do. Like, up to this point, Charlie's been a bit of a stereotype, a bit annoying, sort of not really doing much type thing. And because it was an episode focused on him, because it ended up me going, okay, right, actually, this is a reasonably interesting character that you've got some payoff for the episode for it. Plus, it also did a lot in terms of advancing some of the mysteries that I'm finding interesting.
yeah.
So I definitely didn't perceive this as a particularly negative episode. Like the one that I remember being a bit disappointed about so far was like the Kate episode, possibly, which was episode 3, I think.
Yes.
And I thought this was better than that one.
I think for me, this one, like you say, it gives some depth to Charlie, but I think my main issue with it is the flashbacks. Like you can see what they're doing with that arc for Charlie, but it's all just presented in such a really cliche way. Like it's the first time for me, it really feels like they've fallen back on cliches. Like the whole thing of like his band gets successful, then like he falls into drugs, and his band are ignoring him. Also, the fact that his band appears to be him and his brother and nobody else.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely an interesting one because I mean, it definitely does suffer from being a little bit cliche or something, however you want to describe it in terms of what the sort of storyline was. But I still think that's just a big improvement on what the character of Charlie was prior
Oh,
to this episode, if that makes sense. Um,
I guess
and
it might be one of those strange things where kind of knowing already that Charlie is more than he initially appears. It's probably one that's more interesting watching it a first time round.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that because the whole point of it is that you've taken a character that you haven't really had much investment in and adding some investment to him. And if it transpires, he's an important character going forward, and you've seen all 6 seasons or whatever it is of it, you probably won't care as much about, oh yeah, I knew that already type thing, because it's a kind of a reveal episode as opposed to a particularly well crafted episode.
Yeah.
Because as you say, the flashback, like the storyline, is very cliche. The big metaphor of the moth is a bit sort of hitting you over the head with it the whole way along. But as a first time round, my impression of it, oh, that's fine. You kind of see where there were some weaknesses in the writing and stuff like that. Initial experience of it, you go, yeah, okay. I went away thinking that was a good episode in terms of I learned something. It made me want to watch more of this character. It made me want to learn more about the various mysteries that are still ongoing type thing.
I guess for me, it's mainly the flashback bits that I don't like. I think there's still some nice stuff going on the island.
So, well, I mean, the flashbacks, yeah, it's a little bit of a. I mean, bear in mind you've got maybe 10 minutes worth to play with the whole of the flashbacks. It's kind of difficult, I think, to do, a particularly interesting, epic background storyline. You've always going to have to, if you want to tell this type of story of the rags to riches to fame to descent into craziness type thing, it's always going to have to be fairly poorly done in terms of the writing. But there were bits of it I did like. Like I liked the complete reversal in terms of like the two brothers. So you had like, particularly like you had things just even like their clothing, where like the first time you meet Charlie, he's wearing the sort of clean cut jumpers and the other bits and pieces, while the brothers in the sort of metal t-shirts and all the other bits and bobs. And by the end of it, they've reverted completely into the exact opposite in terms of way of dressing and all the other bits and pieces. And I thought that was, reasonably well done. Interesting that it ended with Charlie literally about to board the plane, having had the sort of kind of fight with his brother.
Yeah.
Because he's even wearing the same shirt as he's got on in the plane, so it literally must be that day.
it's the first real set of flashbacks where there's not really any surprise in it. If you compare it to like the ones we've had with Jack and his dad, they're like that twists and turns like a few times. The ones with obviously Sun and Jin kind of keep you guessing a bit. Particularly compare it to, try not to talk about it too much now, but the flashbacks you get in the next episode tell like you can kind of guess where they're going before they get there, but not too far in advance of it. Whereas this one, I think it's kind of the story that you expect to be told, which is fine. It makes sense, and it does add to Charlie. But it's like there's nothing in these kind of flashbacks that are really that surprising.
It might not necessarily be surprising, but it's the first. I think it's the first time you get that. Oh, okay, Charlie isn't like this lifelong hard rocker, drug addict type person. It was like he started off as something very different type thing. So, and this is the first time you're finding that out. So you're definitely learning stuff about the character. It's a case of, okay, that's not what he was. He's not what his brother was, but he is this other type of character who's led down a path of temptation and embraces it type thing ultimately.
Which I think keys into probably the key themic kind of thing of the episode, particularly like the series as a whole, which again comes from that the Bastion of Knowledge Locke, where he says life is a series of choices.
Yeah, I've got that one written down in my notes. And there's a few interesting things, like going back to like the stuff on the island that you've got there. Like there's a few bits and pieces going on there. Like there's the fact that Locke gets him to ask him 3 times for his drugs, which kind of seems like a religious reference. I'm not entirely certain, but it's like, you know, sort of harping back to the Peter betraying Jesus 3 times and all this sort of stuff. So I don't think there's any significance there. But he does do that sort of line about it's what separates us from the animals, this idea of not just going on instinct, but to actually make your choices that serve the betterment of either yourself or the group, which is something that, you know, you get referenced a lot in other works. So like I immediately thought of Dune, because there's this whole thing in Dune about are you human? Like, can you ignore the instinct to pull your hand out of the pain box because you know that you'll die if you do that? Interesting, like the whole interaction between Charlie and Locke, like throughout the episode, I think was really well done. And obviously, because I like the character of Locke, all of that just seemed like, you've got Charlie initially being angry and mad that he's given him the drugs, and Locke sort of very calmly doing it. Then you've got a sort of almost pleading when he comes on the second time. And then when he finally comes and Locke's almost sort of disappointed that he's asked him for the 3rd time, and the sort of payoff when he tells he's the one who burns the drug, he makes the choice and he makes it definitively himself. So I think I enjoy all of that stuff. And it's sort of, it might be something that is occurring a little bit quick because it occurs basically in one episode, but it very firmly has moved Charlie from just being sort of comedy relief almost to, oh, okay, he's had his arc. He's hopefully got through the drug thing. We've seen what he was before, so he can be that again. And we've seen that his brother managed to become that again. So he's now probably going to be a useful member of the group moving forward.
And I think there are some nice bits, obviously, where Charlie gets like the positive, I guess, reinforcement, you could say, initially from Jack, when Jack obviously is picked up that Charlie's going through withdrawal, and you get that sense that Charlie's been carrying this kind of like inferiority complex like around, because he's like, you'll think I'm a loser, and now you'll think I'm a loser and a druggie.
Yeah.
But then Jack's kind of does that thing of like, oh, you're not a loser. Like, you've come and tried to save me. That wasn't a loser thing.
Again, that definitely fits back to, I would say it fits back to what you learn from the flashbacks as well, because you've got Charlie coming to the island probably at what's going to be his lowest possible point. And so it makes sense that he's got this inferiority complex, that he's useless and all the other bits and pieces, because if you go back to, when the band was being successful and all the other bits and pieces, and he was the one who wrote the music, he was the one his brother called the rock god type thing. And then you've got this spiral out of control. And he's left just before he gets on the plane with the sort of realization that, well, I can't even perform in the band anymore because no one will sign us without my brother. so I'm useless. It's my brother that's
Yeah.
it's the reinforcement of the brother thing. I'm still addicted to drugs while my brother's managed to kick the habit and has moved on and all this other bits and pieces. And he sort of leaves it exactly at that point in time. And yeah, you have the various interactions with Jack where he's like, I don't have a place, I don't have a usefulness, and all the other bits and pieces. And you've got the conversation with Locke where he's talking about, he's doing the moth metaphor and saying, it's the struggle that makes you strong type thing. And Charlie struggles through the drug addiction type stuff. And then he's the one who ultimately saves Jack by going into the cave and finding the way out type thing. Merging, metaphor continued.
Yeah, and I think that's building up our series of people being saved by symbolic things.
Yep.
So Jack saved by his dead dad, Charlie saved by the moth.
Yep. And there was we also had the, I think you described it as sort of fortuitous timing thing where, Charlie yelling, "I am a rock god," which causes rocks to fall immediately and bury Jack.
Having said the episode's not that strong, there are actually loads of other stuff going on.
Like the B and C plot type thing, or predominantly the B plot is quite good in this episode as well. Like the whole search, the Saeed, Kate and co trying to get the triangulation thing sorted out was good because, again, that was one of the mysteries that you're like, come on, keep pursuing that. That seems like it should be important.
Yeah, well, I thought that bit is quite good because that connects into like a few things. Because obviously it connects into the mystery side of things, and obviously it also ends by adding in another mystery. Yeah,
another mystery. Who is it who hit Saeed over the head at the end?
And then we also learn, like in the next episode, that they've hit him in the head and then smashed up the kit. But just on that one, you get like other little bits. So you get Shannon being left to launch the rocket on the beach. So you have that kind of, is Shannon actually going to be reliable or not? Because so far she's been presented as just being completely useless, apart from speaking French. But no, she actually, does her bit. Then you have the kind of dynamic. They set up a lot of the Kate and Sawyer dynamics in this episode.
Yeah, you've got the sort of quite nice bits of Kate and Sawyer sort of having the spat, and then the bit where Sawyer goes to tell Kate about Jack and just basically gets pissed off of her because like she immediately is like, oh, blah, 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 what were you doing here type thing. He's like, fine, I'm not going to tell you. You're not going to be told about Jack.
I think that's quite interesting because that, again, builds into this kind of building picture we've got of Sawyer where he's actually going out. This is, I think, the first time you really get that impression where he's going out of his way to get people to dislike him. Like for me, this is the first time where it doesn't just come across as him being like selfish with it just for this, like his own needs or whatever. This is the first time where you're thinking, like initially he doesn't tell her because he chooses not to mess around, but then he kind of seemingly lets slip that Jack's trapped, but it's a deliberate slip, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So it's that kind of thing. It's like he's deliberately trying to get people to dislike him, which I think is an interesting element to him. Yeah. Elsewhere, I think a nice little moment I do like is when you see Walt kind of impressed by his dad because Michael's taking charge of the caving.
Yeah, and you get names of two other characters as well because
you get background survivors.
Yeah, it's like you've got names now.
I think that's a beautiful little moment. They just kind of sums it up where they're like, Steve, come with me, and the guy's like, I'm not Steve. I just love this idea that like none of the main cast actually care about like who anybody else is. A little bit of sun starting to stand up to
Jin.
When he tells
the clothing thing, like, no, it's hot. I can. One of the things that I discovered after watching it, interestingly, and because I found that there's a site called Lostpedia online, which is quite good because it actually has like the scripts from the episodes, and there was one bit that was interestingly in the scripts that didn't make it into the episode, and it's quite a little cunning little thing to do because the main mystery you get at the end of this is the whole Saeed gets hit on the head. And interestingly, the way they edit it is that you see Shannon fire her rocket and do what she was supposed to do. It is Shannon. Is that one Shannon?
Yes. Yeah.
But you don't see Sawyer do his thing. You just see that the
Yes,
rocket
it's
does
rocket.
get launched, type thing. And interestingly, in the script, you do see him do it. So it was evidently that they've evidently, in some ways, that it's annoying having read the script going, oh well, that means it's definitely not Sawyer, because clearly the script was written that Sawyer, because the way the script was like, the audience is like, is Sawyer actually going to do it, type thing was what they were going to do. And like, no, Sawyer comes through and launches the rocket and other bits and pieces. But the way they ultimately edited it was that you didn't see him actually do it, you just see the rocket.
I can imagine.
You assume that it has to be him because there's no one else around to have done it.
I imagine that might well have been a change that came, because obviously with like TV shows, their scripts are going to be written quite close together. So I imagine that edit probably came after they probably quite into writing the script for next episode, because that's a key.
Because it's one of those that you want to create as much of a mystery as possible in terms of who actually did this. But no, that was just one of the things, because I was trying to figure out, when did someone say this? And I thought, there's a script, I can check the script, type thing. And as a result of finding the script, it was like, okay, I actually cut this bit out. That's interesting.
This is the first time we get kind of a suggestion that Jack possibly doesn't actually want to leave the island.
Okay.
There's a bit of dialogue with Kate, and then Jack makes a remark about then everybody will be able to leave, but it says it in such a way that implies that's something he doesn't want. And it's at this point, it's possibly not clear whether that is a disappointment that would mean him and Kate going.
Yeah, I mean, that was the way I viewed.
Whether it's like a more of a, I just don't want to leave this island now.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely viewed it as the former, in that it was a conversation about where Jack was being disappointed that Kate didn't want to come and live with him in his cave. And that was where I was coming from that. You also had a few bits and pieces whereby it's like Jack and Kate ignoring the potential feelings for each other, which is completely thrown about as soon as Kate hears that he's in danger, like
off running,
traveling in the rock, trying, let's go, do it. So
I guess as well, you can also say it clearly. Everybody else has picked up on this, because like somebody goes, "Tell Kate, you must tell Kate that Jack is trapped."
Yeah, I mean, there's other than that, there's a couple of other things that I sort of jotted down. So there was an interesting bit where the second time Charlie goes to speak to Locke is ostensibly about, I'm telling you that Jack's been buried. And it's interesting that Locke is like, I'm just going to continue on with my boar skinning type thing. He's just like, are people doing it? It's like, yeah, fine. Don't need to worry about that. Yeah. So it's interesting, given Jack's the one who's buried and all the other leadership type characters are away, you kind of think, well, Locke would be the natural next person to be in charge, but he sort of sees him like, nah, I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to focus on what I'm doing. Just leave that alone. And so that was quite interesting that he just sort of almost shrugged. And and the other sort of, I think, fairly important little bit of interaction was on the sort of quest to go and do the transceiver triangulation stuff, where Saeed basically says, we shouldn't have survived that plane crash.
Yes.
So he's clearly sussed, or in his mind thinks there's something, it's another example of him thinking there's something weird going on in terms of why they're here and all the other bits and pieces. And I think that was the other bit that I'd sort of jotted down as being, that's interesting that he's sort of viewing that as some kind of miracle that they've survived and all this sort of bits and pieces.
Yeah. And he very much, he points out the fact that not only have they survived, but basically most people have survived with only kind of minor injury.
Yeah. But it's a weird, it's a weird scenario, because while all the main cast and people like that are like, there's only minor injuries and stuff, there is a contradiction there, because not everyone did. Because, you had the marshal who was so severely injured that he basically was going to die. You had at least one person who survived only to be sucked into an engine and exploded. Yeah. So it's one of these slightly weird things in terms of how it was going on. But yeah, it was just a sort of important to note that up to that point, I don't think you'd had anything from Saeed in terms of thinking there was something weird going on, and that was his first.
Really had him. Yeah. So slowly, basically everybody's kind of acknowledging this is all a bit weird.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that was an interesting thing. So I jotted this down. I mean, we talked about how there was a nice moment of Walt being impressed with his dad. I've also jotted down. I can't quite remember where it is, but clearly when the cave thing happened, Walt actually says, "Oh, you should go get Mr. Locke." And the fact that I sort of made the point of, oh, but Locke doesn't even care and kind of leaves everyone to deal with it type thing is kind of interesting.
I suppose, yeah, I think probably what they've gone for there is like initially Walt's like, oh, we should get Locke because he doesn't think his dad
is up to it. Yeah,
is up to it, and then he's like, oh, Dad is up to it.
Yeah. And it's interesting that Locke presumably doesn't come and help because he thinks his dad Michael and Co are up for it. So
I think with Locke, I just kind of assume that Locke just thinks in this terms of, if there are people doing it, I'm just going to get in the way, like trying to go and do more. Like I might as well stay what I'm doing because that's still important as well. And I think that's almost like that bit where Locke's like saying to Charlie, "Well, why have you come away from that to come and find me? If like there was no need for you to do that." Yeah, cool. So that was
the Moth.
The Moth.